Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. My name is Yosef and I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm your moderator for this session titled The Transitional Justice in National Reconciliation. It is my pleasure to welcome you all audience members. Let me start by expressing my appreciation to Eri-Platform and the Eri-Platform team and Ambassador Underhand for planning and organizing this symposium. It's a great honor and pleasure to have the opportunity to be here with all of you. Without further ado, I wanted to introduce you panelists who are here to share their expertise and research regarding transitional justice and national reconciliation with us. To my right, Judge Alicia has her background as a judge in Sweden. She currently works as a state attorney for the Swedish Chancellor of Justice. She has been working on transitional justice justice in Cambodia and Kosovo. And to my left is Dr. Out Mikael. He studied history, comparative politics, and public international law. He teaches at Queen's University in Canada. And to my next to Judge Alicia, Tesfa Mahari, Dr. Tesfa Mahari, a graduate of Asmara University in 1988. And presently he got his master's and PhD from Liverpool University. He's currently working as a director of international partnership for University of Greenwich with China, India, Singapore, Malaysia, Greece, Ethiopia, and Zambia. I'm going to give to the panelists. Judge Alicia.
I can start then. I just wanted to say I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also very excited about the discussions we're going to have in this panel. The recent peace settlement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, as well as the lifting of the UN sanctions against Eritrea, gives hope for the future of the country. When I was invited to be part of the panel in this symposium, I was positively surprised that the issue of transitional justice is on the agenda. At the same time, the question does inevitably present itself. Is Eritrea ready to start dealing with its past? In my presentation, I will first talk about the challenges when setting up transitional justice measures in Eritrea. I will conclude that the options available today in Eritrea are limited. I will then describe these options. It is, of course, never too early to speak of how to handle grave crimes committed in the past. However, when it comes to the success of a transitional justice measure, timing is of crucial importance. If carried out too early, transitional justice institutions risk lacking impartiality and might be unable to protect victims and witnesses. Once a mechanism has failed, it might be hard to gather the support for trying again at a more favorable moment. A failed measure might also deepen the victimhood and sense of hopelessness of those who suffered. For a transitional justice regime to be successful, it must be comprehensive, inclusive, and driven by a strong sense of local ownership. When it comes to the comprehensiveness, previous experience from transitioning countries have clearly shown that it is not enough to involve one measure, such as trials, or compensation regimes, or truth commissions. All mechanisms have their limits. Courts are generally bad at truth-finding. Truth commissions, on the other hand, may be perceived as meek if unaccompanied by harder mechanisms. And to a victim, retrieving her land back or being able to send her children to school, but might mean much more than court proceedings. As we all know, there are several impediments to introducing transitional justice mechanisms in Eritrea. The first one is the lack of a functioning and independent court system, which in my opinion currently hinders carrying out criminal justice through court trials. Even if court trials are far from the only transitional justice mechanism available, it is hard to envision a successful transition when none of the most responsible people are prosecuted. There are many reasons for this. Firstly, most people have a strong sense that justice is not done where the gravest crimes go unpunished. Secondly, it is impossible to build up the rule of law in a culture of impunity. Why should petty crimes today be prosecuted when grave crimes of yesterday were not? Thirdly, there can be no real transition if the perpetrators continue to hold high offices. Thus, trials are arguably an inevitable part of a legitimate transition. The aim of court trials in transitional justice is not only to put the most responsible for grave crimes on trial, but also to aid the process of reconciliation and rebuilding of institutions. Setting up, for instance, a special tribunal gives an opportunity to strengthen the local judiciary and aid the establishment of rule of law. However, to be able to impact these processes and contribute towards a lasting peace, the court must be perceived as legitimate by the population it addresses. Another possible measure are reparation programs. These can be individual or collective, financial or non-monetary. Non-monetary and collective compensations have several advantages. It is a viable option for states with limited resources, and it is often easier to secure that vulnerable groups, such as children, benefit from those measures. A practical example is that the building of a school or providing health benefits in an exposed area are more likely to benefit vulnerable groups than monetary compensation, which might go straight to the head of the family. A successful reparation program has the advantage of giving victims restitution and recognition. However, such a regime needs governmental support. Thus, a second impediment is getting the necessary political leverage. Needless to say, it has to be guided by the rule of law principles. Whatever mechanisms are employed, they must be inclusive and gender sensitive. Often, marginalized groups are the ones disproportionately affected by conflict. In Eritrea, according to UN General Assembly reports, women in the military are particularly exposed. Women who are victims of sexual violence risk double victimhood by being ostracized from their communities. A starting point could therefore be to provide grassroots level initiatives to incorporate these women back into their communities and provide safe spaces for them to talk about their experiences. Another example could be educational programs for youth on gender roles. Another starting point could be setting up a truth-seeking commission in Eritrea. The information to date of what happens in the country is limited and quite unreliable. A first step is therefore setting up an independent body to investigate the crimes committed and record a reliable and legitimate account of the past. As with any other measure, there is no doubt that such a commission will fail if it is not objective, independent, and legitimate. The question is if there are such resources available today to set up a commission. Whatever path is chosen, it is important to remember that the capacity of transitional justice measures to right the wrongs of the past are limited. It is very positive and a step forward that the discussion today takes place. Transitional justice is a prerequisite for establishing democracy and healing wounds. However, previous experience from transitioning countries show that the process often leads to disappointment at the individual level. Transitional justice will necessarily be imperfect. This is vital to keep in mind when managing expectations and making promises to the people. Thank you.
the squeeze of the time and probably with the difficulty of following such an eloquent presentation, I will try to make it more conversational rather than reading with my notes, because I don't think I can finish them on time with my clumsiness. So for me, therefore, when the topic was given to me, it took me slightly out of my comfort zone. It would have been easier for me to speak about the transition without digging into the reconciliation and the transitional justice, but at least I will give you some bullet points on how I perceive things, and then probably whatever gap we have, we can fill it during the discussion. Why are we here today, and why is this topic necessary? We assume, at least, either we are at or we are nearing into a new political dispensation, which will hopefully might facilitate a process of reconciliation. This political reality, we hope, will lead to a new political dispensation. The political dispensation would have to come with a scenario where we have a state of mutual recognition of protagonists in the process. Therefore, if we are to transition from a state of emergency to a state of normalcy, then inevitably the state of abnormal period or a period of emergency has created its own wounds. It might have also created its own winners and losers. And in this process, if we are going to have a united country and function as a state, then this is a period which we need to address. When we observe this process of this new political reality, it comes about from what we believe is happening to Ethiopia and Eritrea, and probably with repercussions to the wider region. We see that Ethiopia and Eritrea have now signed an official treaty and of peace, and therefore a state of war has ended and there is a state of peace. In addition to that, recently we also have the sanctions of the UN on Eritrea has also gone. We might have a view about it, whether that was an excuse, or even both of them, whether the border war and the border war as well as the sanctions were fake excuse or real, but there is a section of Eritrean society which believes they were real, and more than that, the government has used them as the main reason why we did not get our rights. So this therefore creates the fact that these two issues have gone, all excuses have now gone from the hands of the government, and there is no reason at all for us not to think that we deserve to be a normal country and have normal situations. That therefore will create a scenario for us to unite, not as opposition or government, but people who have no power at all, who have no say on whatever happens in Eritrea, and the few people who concentrate power during this period. That concentration of power has taken place for 20 years. And if we take this 20 years of concentration of power, every person can consider this the most abnormal period in Eritrean society. Why? Because the Eritrean situation has given us 30 years of war. That was war of liberation, which every Eritrean accepted this is normal. We have been challenged. A dictator called Haile Selassie took our independence, and with the clear symbols that our flag has been lowered, our constitution has been deleted or removed, and our parliament of Eritrea, that now the federal parliament, has been closed. For this reason, therefore, we have to take arms, and therefore that was legitimate. The whole Eritrea was mobilized to do this. Even if it has taken 30 years, we can more or less say, at least on the cause and the reason for our suffering was clear. We had only a period of 7 years of normality. just 7 years. And after that, we were again rewarded, sadly, with another 20 years. Therefore, out of the 57 years from 1961 up to present, we only have 7 years of normality, but 50 years of misery. That creates a society which has been completely devastated, a society which needs a healing process. The next question which comes is, the second war, the interim period of 7 years, were a periods of hope, even though many people might see that they were not included there. But that was a period where the promise of the overall revolution seems to have been honored, because the government that was established clearly described itself in 1991 as provisional government, and it clearly reaffirmed its commitment which the EPLF entered in its 1987 Congress, where the aim is to create a democratic society, a society based on justice, and a society which is inclusive. It may not have been fulfilled in the eyes of many in 1991, when Isaias spoke about there will not be Udubat Hashawiyah, but nonetheless, people of a big section of society has followed and accepted the promise of the government, because the government said we are provisional and therefore will take it through constitution. But in the interim, therefore, the key moments which enabled the participation of the Eritrean society were the 1993 referendum and the 1997 constitution. These were clearly the political events which required participation of Eritrea, which said we Eritreans want to be independent states. Therefore, it legitimized the liberation war. And the 1997 act of ratifying the constitution also provided, okay, Eritrea belongs to the people of Eritrea, and therefore the government of Eritrea should be elected by the people of Eritrea to serve the people of Eritrea. Hence, what we are talking today, therefore, should be the precondition, the facilitator for this process. Normality, therefore, will mean, okay, we'll continue from where we left off. And that period was a period where you promised and you're about to fulfill your promise to transition the Eritrean power, the Eritrean people, and therefore we'll start to go back. So it is to facilitate that process that we need this period of reconciliation, this period of healing. Why healing? Because the past 20 years have created untold misery on the Eritrean society. Almost every family which has probably paid martyrs and other sufferings during the 30 years struggle, again has asked to pay again. It was a period where we have seen mass dislocation, mass displacement, death, even extrajudicial killings, political prisoners, and everything that comes. Therefore, during this period, therefore, we can clearly say the Eritrean society is completely different from the one that we had before. So we need a period of healing. Okay. Where do we get this healing process, therefore? How do we get this healing process? Either we have to dig into our tradition in a situation where people have informed on each other, people have sold their compatriots, people have died in the desert, people have drowned in the sea, people have been arrested, disappeared within Eritrea, and there are societies, families which don't know whether their people have their fathers, mothers, sons, and family members are alive or not. Therefore, this status needs to be determined. Traditionally, therefore, we had a traditional situation where the people of Eritrea would say, as a community, we need to resolve, therefore elders will get involved, and therefore they would resolve. Probably that would be too much for us to handle at that level. Court, as Alicia said, would be either we don't have the court system, if not, then is that what we want again? Thirdly, can we create a scenario of truth and reconciliation where people would acknowledge, tell the truth, determine the status of disappeared, and probably with that, a form of compensation, either us as a society, can be arranged. On that, therefore, again, we can come back during the discussion. The nearest that I felt would probably help us would be the experience of Chile. The experience of Chile came in a situation where the Chilean government, Chile had a dictatorship which emerged, removed an elected government. Probably can relate it in our case. An elected government has not been removed, but the election has been stalled, and therefore we have been stopped, and therefore the existing government turned it into a dictatorship, and there was literally military takeover in Eritrea. This military takeover, which means the existing government turned itself into a dictatorship, and therefore that could be the parallel. In Chile, all the disappearance and the killings were taking place, but still there was an opposition was still within Chile itself, and therefore still was negotiating. As part of those negotiations, the opposition within Chile, and to an extent with some connections with the diaspora, were debating amongst themselves to say whether to accept the constitution and all the legal restrictions which the government or the dictatorship has created. Eventually, a majority has persuaded to say the only way out, however unjust you might think, however difficult you might think, but we need to accept their constitution and operate within their rules. So at least that will give us a chance to work from within. And that therefore led into a form of discussion with the government and a coalition of multitudes of opposition groups. They were not united, and therefore that gives us hope. There were so many opposition groups, but they succeeded into creating an umbrella to discuss. Therefore, say, okay, we'll play by your rules, and we'll have one speaker to negotiate with you. And with that, they managed to succeed. They managed to persuade the Pinochet government to run a referendum, and that referendum in 1988. To their surprise and the world's surprise, the government was expecting a ringing endorsement, but the people have rejected it. And that therefore created, say, we are not endorsing. Literally, Pinochet was asking, I've done very well, I've served you well, I removed the communists, and therefore reward me with another 8 years. And people said no. And that therefore created a situation where a constitutional process, an election has to be arranged, and that election has taken place, and the opposition won. And during the opposition campaign, the issue of reconciliation and transitional justice was part of the agenda and part of the campaign platform. And that campaign platform, therefore, immediately within a month, the government, therefore, has declared a truth and reconciliation committee, and that committee, therefore, has it was created by a balance between the government supporters and the government opponents, with some middle person in between. And the outcome, therefore, as we can see, such reconciliations, they never made everyone happy. Many people have said this is not justice. Others said this is too much. Especially the crisis came when to say we will pass every information that we have that we gathered from here to the court. Therefore, if anyone wants to persuade, they can continue. But in terms of compensation and the healing, it took, and the nation has taken, and therefore creative ways of compensating those people was created in the form of providing families with education support, with health support, with pension support. Therefore, literally, in terms of compensating and the healing process, it became a collective act where the state has said it was a tragedy for the whole Chile, and the whole Chile people with their government will do the compensation process. And with that, therefore, the nation managed to, the military has been pushed increasingly, although they tried to come back, especially when Pinochet was arrested in London under an international warrant. And therefore some legal proceedings have started to take place, but eventually as a fight, the nation managed to heal itself probably I don't have that much time, but I'm quite happy for us to come back to that, and I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to first thank Ambassador Abdelrahman and Eri-Platform for inviting me. I'll speak in English, but I'll take questions in Tigrinya, Arabic, and Tigray. And before I go on this, I would like to apologize to the victims of our current state of affairs for daring to say what I'm about to say. Should anyone be offended by what I'm about to say, also, I'd like to apologize to them and assure them that the intention is not to offend anybody. And I will spare you the details, the gory detail of our hardship, because we're all in this. I'll jump straight to the content of my paper. How can Eritreans pursue effective remedy for past and ongoing violations on the one hand, and on the other hand, ensure the peace and stability of the current and future generations is the key issue that we have to discuss, I think. In spite of numerous discouraging signs, national reconciliation and political transition remain the least harmful avenues left for us. My paper makes a case for these twin processes in order to heal societal wounds and put the country back on track toward an inclusive political dispensation. Societies that experience violent internal conflicts and/or severe and widespread human rights violations resort to different mechanisms of collectively overcoming their tragic experiences and charting a shared path to the future. The concept of transitional justice broadly sums up one such mechanism. In a concise genealogical analysis of the concept and practice of transitional justice, Ruti Tito identified three broad stages. I will spare you the two, but I'll talk about the third, which is the current phase, and that saw a return to international justice and an uneasy normalization of transitional justice due to the widespread political security instability, proliferation of wars, and conflation of human rights law and humanitarian law. It's a reflection of this third phase that in 2016, the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea called on the United Nations Security Council to designate the situation in Eritrea as, quote-unquote, threat to international peace and security, and recommended to the Security Council that it refers Eritrea to the ICC prosecutor. International criminal law, however, tends to individualize crime or criminal responsibility, even in situations of complex communal violence. Moreover, the strategy of prosecuting a select few leaves the vast majority of the active participants and accomplices of the violence unscathed. As a result, the system, the repressive system, remains insufficiently castigated, and the cycle risks repeating itself. In light of that, I believe that what is needed is for us to collectively take responsibility, if hierarchical responsibility, for the fiasco that independent Eritrea has become. We need to prioritize the victims and survivors by caring for them and their loved ones, through reparations to them and honoring their legacy, and by responsibly realizing their right to the truth of what happened to them and what happened to their loved ones. All the while, we need to work together to put in place a system that ensures that such a tragedy does not happen again. What then is national reconciliation? It may sound easy, and my effort to unpack it won't make it particularly easier, but we'll try. National reconciliation is a peaceful stopgap measure that a society or a nation devises in order to avert conflicts or end ongoing internal strife, or to put to rest a troubled past, all of which we have. It is an all-inclusive mechanism of getting out of or altogether avoiding undesirable socio-political and security environment in which a society finds itself. As a process of collective social healing, reconciliation fundamentally rests on people seeking forgiveness on forgiving others, and lending victims the needed moral and material support to heal, and much, much more. As a political and legal mechanism, reconciliation helps usher a new era whereby the rights of citizens are protected and future conflicts are avoided through legal, political, and other arrangements that can guarantee the non-return of the pre-existing violent environment. Legal political transition thus becomes an inseparable part of the process of national reconciliation, although those are two different processes. They are inseparable. Some people mistake national reconciliation for disguising impunity of perpetrators and sweeping under the rug the real issues and grievances of citizens. It is true that reconciliation has been used and abused for such ends, but it's fundamentally a victim-centered process, and as such, it gives precedence to restorative justice over retributive or punitive justice. It can, and in several cases, it has involved meting out punitive measures against perpetrators. If that were to be in Eritrea, it would require commensurate prosecutorial and judicial mechanisms whose feasibility and desirability would have to be carefully examined. And in the current reality, that looks unlikely. There is no universal formula for national reconciliation. Every society that deems it necessary to go through reconciliation adopts a process befitting its challenges in accordance with its values, traditions, and shared vision. Many societies have adopted different approaches and levels of reconciliation to address challenges unique to them and have had varying degrees of success. But among many Eritreans, the idea of reconciliation evokes images of large-scale killings along ethnic, religious, or other cleavages that have taken place in different countries around the world. And they consider it, because of that, they consider it inappropriate for the Eritrean situation. Ethnic cleansing or genocide and other mass killings are not the only tragedies that warrant resolution through reconciliation, however. Cases of large-scale violence like the 1994 Rwandan genocide do not come about overnight. They typically are the culmination of long and layered structural or systemic violence and physical violence that go on unaddressed at their earliest manifestation. Other Eritreans state that their objection to national reconciliation by saying, and I quote, "We do not have problems with each other. Our only problem is with the regime in Asmara," unquote. But aren't the leaders, members, and supporters of this government also Eritrean citizens who must be included in a reconciliation effort in order to ensure social harmony and political stability? As a matter of principle and practice, no alternative that cannot promise to uphold the rights of these citizens can guarantee the rights of the rest of the citizenry. Moreover, from the point of view of the victims, the violations that the regime is committing or is allegedly committing are being executed by fellow citizens. Whoever gave the orders aside, it's only natural to expect victims to hold grudges against the individual perpetrators of those violations. Similarly, it is to be expected that those who commit the wrongs would want to pursue every possible avenue to avoid answering for their actions. Unless addressed through a process of reconciliation, the gap between the victims seeking justice and or vengeance, on the one hand, and perpetrators and alleged perpetrators, on the other hand, seeking to avoid responsibility, can take us down a fratricidal path and suck the nation and country into a bottomless abyss. Some other Eritreans argue that the wrongs of the Liberation War era were put to rest by EPLF's successful conclusion of the struggle. After liberation, they continue, the Eritrean government had to take measures it deemed appropriate to ensure the safety of the people and stability and territorial integrity of the country. Both of these points are flawed, in my view. First, at least from the point of view of documenting the history of the liberation struggle and locating our respective experiences in it, national reconciliation, especially the truth-telling and history-writing components of it, can and does help narrow differences, cultivate shared understanding of our collective past, and reinforce our commitment to one another as sisters and brothers of the same motherland, irrespective of our political, religious, ethnic, and regional identities. This is important because diverging national discourses about a shared past can be a recipe for continuous division into the future and bode ill for long-term stability of any country. Second, any measure that the government takes against its citizens in the absence of democratic rule of law is worse and far more consequential than the mere physical violence that the victims endure. In other words, more than the actual physical slap I feel on my face, what is hurtful and consequential is what empowered that person to slap me in the face, is what I'm trying to say basically. Unbridled state violence, weak or weakening institutions, and disenfranchised citizenry is a toxic mix that breeds and sustains structural violence in society, which is much, much harder to eradicate. In light of our internal weaknesses, both institutional and manpower, we can address both forms of violence, that's the physical as well as the structural violence, through an inclusive national conversation and consensus. That is why national reconciliation should have taken place in Eritrea more than 20 years ago. Now, it's the only viable alternative we have remaining to rescue the nation and salvage the legacy of our struggle for independence. I say this for a number of reasons. Even though the violence of our struggle for independence was primarily against foreign oppressors, Eritrea's liberation movements clashed violently with each other and resorted to violence against their respective rank and file and against the civilian population as well. Even though armed struggle was the last resort left for our forefathers and mothers, that does not change the fact that the end does not always justify the means. And no end can justify the means when in the end the means cannot be subjected to scrutiny and ultimately put to rest. Unfortunately in Eritrea, not only did the means through which independence was achieved remain beyond reproach, but it rules the day, every day. The violence and violations of the past were not put to rest, nor was an inclusive system of laws and protections instituted to advance the rights of citizens and to restrain the urge of the powerful to do anything and everything in order to ensure smooth operation of business of government, whatever that is. As a direct consequence, our people and country find themselves in untenable grounds. At the heart of it all lies our neglect to varying degrees of our duties as citizens to hold our government answerable to us. That then leads me to the question of why collective responsibility. I know I am probably going to run over, but please bear with me. The tragic turn of events, as has been seen and experienced in post-independence Eritrea, and the attendant challenges cannot be entirely relegated to the failings or malice of a single person or a single group. No problem of this magnitude can be caused by a single person or a single group, is basically what I'm trying to say. Nor can the impediments to change be miniaturized to such an individual or a group. Immediately after independence, and I'm cutting right and left, please forgive me if you feel offended by this. Immediately after independence, high and middle-ranking members of the former liberation movements failed to empower the public and put in place a system of checks and balances on the government. Similarly, during formative years of independence, Eritrea's most capable professionals and intellectuals failed to educate the public about alternative politics and to inform and shepherd policy toward constructive and sustainable course. And instead of demanding and taking their rights, the majority of ordinary citizens waited on the government to bestow on them their rights. All the while, some of us actively worked for the system, some of us cheered it on, some of us enabled it directly or indirectly. The vast majority of us did not care enough and so turned the other way, or were too trusting of the system when core principles of good citizenship required that we remained vigilant at all times. Who then is free from these failings? None of us. Or extremely, too few of us are free from these failings to cause a movement or to say we are free from the failings and now we can bring about change. In an August 1857 speech, the African-American abolitionist and prolific orator Frederick Douglass timelessly captured the perils of an apathetic, submissive, or trusting citizenry. And he said, I'm quoting him, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and this will continue until they are resisted," unquote. The level of repression in Eritrea is not only a poignant measure of the endurance of the oppressed, but as Douglass ably and subtly pointed out, it is also a measure of the citizens' complicity, active or passive. To the extent that we contributed toward the current dire situation, therefore, we bear responsibility. Any people get the government that they earn and deserve, and not one that they wish for. But we've been locked in a cycle of mutual disempowerment or paralysis. As government actions, misactions, and inactions stripped citizens of their agency and ownership of their affairs, so too has the consequent public disengagement erode the state's capacity to deliver on the promises of independence and dividends of peace. Who then can blame whom? When I ask this question, I am cognizant of the fact that it's risky to water down the notion of responsibility. So we can discuss that further. It's my contributor to deliver our people and country to the edge of the precipice that we stand at today. What is needed to bring us back from the gates of hell is commonplace self-healing and healing of others through the equally ordinary act of seeking one another's forgiveness and finding it in ourselves to forgive others. It is high time that Eritreans got in touch with the core values that made independence possible in the first place, and reawaken the long-stalled pluralist political programs through inclusive processes. Allow me to conclude. The reception of the idea of national reconciliation among Eritreans, or lack of reception, reflects the polarized Eritrean political landscape and many of its constantly shifting shades in between. Some cautionary remarks are in order. Choosing who to reconcile with, or ruling out reconciliation with one person or group, is not sufficiently inclusive to be called national reconciliation, in my view. Such reconciliation, or deal-making, as a political bridge, can happen among political elites that may or may not culminate in some kind of power and or resource sharing. But it typically does not last beyond its political utility within the narrow confines of the circumstances that demanded it in the first place. Moreover, we have two misfortunes to contend with. First, the Eritrean government is a shadow of its former self, presiding over an even weakened state, too shriveled up to effect a meaningful change on its own, even if it wanted to. Second, there are no cohesive, credible, and strong opposition forces in manageable numbers to ensure some kind of equilibrium, hold the government's feet to the fire, or that can lend it the support it needs to carry out the delicate and complex task of national reconciliation and political transition. The national reconciliation that is badly needed in Eritrea, and one that is most appropriate, is a holistic one that puts a particular emphasis on the grassroots and the victims. Only by reclaiming our individual worth as human beings and by asserting our powers as citizens through such a process can we guarantee harmony and social justice. The grassroots process has the intrinsic value of raising awareness of the people to spur their sustained re-engagement in their affairs. It can re-galvanize our resources around the cause of national salvation and restoration. It can reverse the disempowerment of our people, bring back our dispersed population, restore our disintegrating social fabric, reinforce Eritrean patriotism, and rehabilitate the image of our country. Anything short of meaningful empowerment of the people, from whom legitimate political power springs, would be no more than cosmetic changes. And there are no shortcuts to empowering ourselves, restoring our dignity, and getting back in touch with our humanity. All of our efforts would otherwise be in vain, as will the selfless, numbingly heroic sacrifices of generations of Eritreans. Thank you.